All right, good morning, everybody. My name is John Schlager. I'm the CEO of Inceptus, and I'm here, Matt Sywulak from INKY. We're here to talk about avoiding cybersecurity debt and why delaying investments costs more in the long run. My name is John Schlager. I've been in this industry for 30 plus years. I've worked in numerous spaces across the DoD intelligence community as well as commercial space for Fortune 100 companies. Matt, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Matt Sywulak. I'm the Senior Director of Customer Engineering over here at INKY. Really what that means is I run the sales engineering team, but also interface with our product and engineering. I got my start in the cybersecurity space sort of similarly with the intelligence community. I was a I was in the Army about 10 years ago and was stationed at the NSA as my first deployment station, my first duty station. So uh, being there really introduced me to cyber, and it kind of actually made me switch my major when I was going through college then too. So I switched to cybersecurity and haven't looked back. So I've been with the government for about 10 years and then now 7 years with INKY. So yeah,
Yeah, awesome. No,
nice
great
to have me.
journey. I mean,
Yeah,
I think a lot of cyber guys kind of get bored out of the NSA, which is kind of funny. We
yeah,
all kind of keep running into each other over and over again. So
that's how it
pretty
goes.
funny on that part. But yeah, no, appreciate the intro and telling us a little bit about yourself, and obviously we've been doing this a long time. We've seen a lot of bad things happen across multiple customer spaces, and verticals, industries, DoD, all over the place, federal civilian government. So, we have bring a breadth of knowledge and expertise, I believe, when it comes to topics, especially around, cyber debt, and today we're going to talk about a few things and kind of, our objectives today are going to answer a few questions for everyone because, cyber debt's pretty relatively new as a term, and we used to call them vulnerabilities and risk, but they've kind of now have a name and it's been coined that. But we'll talk about that. We'll define that a little bit. We're going to also talk about the difference between cyber debt and technical debt. We'll talk about the hidden costs of cyber debt. We'll talk about some use cases of people who delayed certain things and where it actually hurt their business growth. Essentially, we'll talk about how AI is also revolutionizing cyber strategy. I mean, does that sound like a good agenda, Matt?
Yeah, it sounds great. I've got a whole bunch of points here to help talk us through it.
Nice.
So happy to
Nice.
dive in whenever.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, I appreciate that. That's going to make for a great conversation. So, cyber debt, let me just define that for everybody here so we are all kind of on the same page here. In layman's terms, it's risk. It's the risk an organization takes on when it knowingly or unknowingly neglects its cybersecurity, often to save time and money. We see this over and over again with, you know, budgets and certain things like that, and how cyber kind of takes a back step or back page to a lot of these different things because money gets spent elsewhere. There's not usually an ROI or a return on your investment from cyber spending. Most people look at it as an insurance, but it's not at all what it is. But cyber debt, here's the definition of it. So cybersecurity debt is the cumulative risk and security vulnerabilities that accumulate when an organization postpones or neglects security measures and investments. Just like financial debt, it accrues interest, making systems more vulnerable to attacks over time, increasing future remediation costs, and potentially leading to costly data breaches and operational disruptions. I mean, does that sound about right, Matt?
Yeah, no, it definitely does. I know there's a whole bunch of different types of cyber debt, of course, the ones you just mentioned, but I always like to think about people all the time too, because we're all here to protect the people. So the biggest cyber debt, if you're not good with your people, good with training, can actually accumulate just as quickly as technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, I had a mentor at the NSA. He says the only true way to secure a system is to get rid of its users. So,
Yeah.
I mean, probably a very true statement, and especially because all attacks pretty much happen from a failure from a user, right? I would pretty go out on a limb and say that. So,
It's a
here's
pretty
a
high
question
number,
for
like
you.
99%, right?
Yeah, I really think
Yeah.
so. That's like, yeah, that's a can of worms. But here I'm gonna ask you a question. What are common sources of cyber debt do you see, Matt? Across the industry.
Yeah, I think the one that we deal with mostly is the people. The main place in the email security space itself is training your users through either monthly, quarterly, or yearly, phishing simulations or, cyber training. Every year you get your updated training to say, hey, go through this and you're a checkbox away from being compliant for the next year. Or make sure you have a quarterly phishing simulation. And if you do that, you're good to go. I would say
Yeah,
that's not
absolutely.
just inadequate. I think it's definitely not enough because users are getting attacked every single day. So, even though you're doing that training monthly, quarterly, and yearly, you really have to have a touch point with those people more frequently. And I think the user side of the house, like I just mentioned, is the biggest form of cyber debt I think we as phishing protection company deals with on a day-to-day basis with.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if we think about the attack, metrics and the attack vector that they come in through. I mean, email is one of those things
Yeah.
that user deals with every day. They're constantly getting emails. Half of them are garbage. The other half is spam, and then you have all those that are just kind of sprinkled in that are super crafty phishing attacks, and clicking on stuff is the fastest way to infect your computer, right? So I would also think too, in the whole step of the things too, we have all the other side of that too, like hardening of systems, patching, poor configuration management, things that we see pretty much constantly from an MSP, MSSP side of the house is, people are always just doing the bare minimum. They think they install Microsoft 365 and they're running on, they have multi-factor that they're good, but they have assets that are connecting to the internet at Starbucks, that haven't been hardened and those sorts of things. So we see huge stuff, huge issues with that,
And you're getting into
insufficient
the
controls.
yeah, you're getting into the crazy world of like token hijacking, people sniffing tokens and being able to bypass MFA. So there's a whole bunch of litany of concerns that maybe even you don't even know about just yet that still are real everyday problems.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. One of my biggest things in cyber debt is risk mitigation, and those sorts of things is trying to figure out how you can look at all of those things and implement tools that fit those needs. But, rushed implementation is another huge cyber debt issue, that we see out
Yeah.
there. We see a lot of customers who don't really know the applications. They implement these services, but they have pretty basic policies out of the box, and don't really harden their system. So, we see that kind of happen, or it's not implemented properly, though, those sorts of things too. So.
I think it's really key to have a good onboarding with any cyber tool you bring on. It really is. If you're just checking a box and bringing on a security tool that just does this and says you're good to go within like 30 minutes, probably take a step back and say, hey, let's run through these, make sure we're doing the best practices, not missing something. Because at the end of the day, humans make mistakes. So whoever you have as your onboarding person, maybe they just forgot something that day. Maybe they were just tired. So it's always good to
Yeah.
take a double check on every single tool you bring on board and not just be, adding tools willy-nilly like we all like to do.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And also too, if you choose a vendor and you go with them, you have to constantly look at those new advancements and different services that get added because you guys have a long line of, next quarters, and features and functionality that you want to bring in there, right? So we got to
Yeah,
make
for
sure
sure.
that we are constantly implementing. And we've done this in the past and have been slack on certain things and haven't realized that new technologies and new services have become available, and haven't implemented those for our customers fast enough. Now we've kind of changed our process to identify those types of things to make sure, because that's something huge, that most people don't know. There's since that security landscape is constantly evolving, we have to evolve in our products, and when we do that, those
Sure.
added features and functionalities need to be implemented. And sometimes they aren't automatically, and you have to go in and flip a switch, change one of those policies. But that needs to be in there
Yeah.
too, as a cycle.
From a vendor side of the house, there's a nice healthy line that we try to tread on new features of like, okay, can I just enable this for everybody and be off to the races? Or is this a little too aggressive and we'll get pushback? So there's always that healthy
Yeah.
line from a vendor side of the house, but it is if for things that are definitely, going to protect users like phishing updates, we have a whole data team that's working to make sure that we're catching phishing in real times. We'll push those out, no questions asked. But if it like changes core functionality, then it's likely going to be a feature release and notification process rather than just a flip of the switch.
Yeah, and yeah, for sure. We see that. We've been seeing that a lot, especially around credential harvesting.
Yeah.
Huge problem. Lots of customers, new customers of ours, they've kind of fallen for that, and given their credentials, and it's taken out their entire infrastructure, just from a simple email, that looked real, put in your credentials, they have the same pages, everything. You just got to be real careful, and your tools, and certain tools out there help with that. So that's kind of nice. But so let's change
Sure.
gears real quick. Let's talk about, like, what about consequences of cyber debt? What are some of those things that could affect us? That could actually cause an issue or increase cost for us in the long run? Those sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, I get that at the end of the day, if you don't implement something and you're just sort of open, so like an email security platform like INKY is there to help protect against those next generation threats. If you're just using some base standard protections that Microsoft offers, say spam or even Google Workspace offers, maybe they're not catching that next generation threat that really is the compromise. Those compromises have real dollar figures associated with them, whether it is sort of remediation actions that say just the MSP can take care of, and like luckily there's no like business consequences. It's just sort of dollars and cents of cost to fix. But on the very real side of the house, of course, there's that other side where they can actually get in there, change emails around, say, do a nice little man in the middle attack to try to change a direction from one email to another. And maybe you start sending invoices to the wrong email address, and then they get paid to the wrong person. So then the real, very real consequences of not doing something start to add up a lot heavier. And of course, I know the average sort of breach cost these days is trending up to about $4 million. Now that's if like a real loss occurs. There's a whole bunch of losses before that that are still business impacting that will happen before you're in the stats of like $4 million average cost. But those little bits up to that point are still, business affecting, even for, because small businesses, $4 million is a lot, and that's the average.
Right.
So imagine what it is leading up to that point for every other small business.
Yeah, I mean, key to that too, you're talking about financial losses, those types of things too. Like reputational damage to me is key. Like we've seen, here locally in Southwest Florida, we've seen doctors' offices go out of business and certain things from data breaches. So just not being able to recover from just the thought or just the word, can be hurtful, from that kind of loss or public
Yeah,
knowledge of your attack.
and I guess everything. I always like I'm an email provider, so email security provider. So I always go back to email. But if you start getting a compromise and someone starts sending out phishing emails from your domain starts tanking very quickly, and so that's
Yeah.
a real business loss immediately, and that's where
Yeah,
the trust comes in.
yep. Right after, credential theft, about a week later, you'll see the actual attack, and start sending out emails, great,
Yeah.
Outlook rule sets, those types of
Yep.
things, bad stuff's happening real
There's
quick,
a pretty typical tactic, compromise, transport rule set, then sit and wait, try to start exfiltrating some of their SharePoint data, and then start sending out phishing emails if they're kind of lucky. So
Yeah,
cool.
absolutely. That's funny. Yeah,
Yeah.
operational disruption. Right there. There you go. You're down for a
Yeah,
while now. So that's kind of one of the
for
worst
sure.
things too. So okay, how about let's talk about some of those. How do we reduce cyber debt within our organizations? What are some steps that you would, recommend to people besides
Reducing the
technology
cyber, yeah,
integration and those
step,
sorts of
yeah.
things?
It is a people process. At the end of the day, there's people process and technology, but those two together, people and process, is probably your number one way to reduce some of your debt. Obviously, I said that training is enough, but it is a starting point that everyone needs to do. If you're not training your users, whether it is through security awareness training in those monthly or those yearly sort of trainings that you require, you should be at least doing some sort of brown bag session, I think monthly, to your employees to say, hey, there's some new trends out there. People are calling help desk and pretending to be people.
Mhm.
Don't give out credentials to the help desk. Like there's some very real things that happen in this world, and they sort of follow. uh no, I would like to think of it as like no one's really unique in this world. There's always some 0 day that happens, but after that 0 day happens, typically you're hit with a repeat attack that's just following a trend. And so that 0 day definitely will happen to someone, but most of the people out there that get attacked are hit by a copycat or a follow-on attack that works because it's similar to the one that worked initially. So if you are up and aware of the trends that are happening, and this happens through just general understanding of the news cycle, I guess that's hard to do these days. But from a cybersecurity news cycle, if you just sort of keep in tune with that and then update your end users, say, hey, even just a monthly tech training or even a weekly newsletter, something like that, to say, hey, just look for some of these things, and if you see something, say something. It's sort of, I hate to say it's that easy. It's not, because no one will always read all their emails or attend on these webinars. But at the end of the day, it is people. And
Yeah.
so we want to protect them, and having them have all the information, or as much information as possible, I think is the easiest way to knock down debt from a cyber debt. Because again, as we started off at the very top, the most likely cause of a breach is a person. So how can we get that cause down a bit, train them up a little bit more?
Yep. Security culture. Fostering
Yeah.
one is huge within an organization, and that's it's kind of helping transition teams do that as well. Like that see something, say something. It's like people don't usually do that. Reporting emails, hey, this
Mm-hmm.
looks suspicious. That's why we have teams that look through that stuff to say, hey, you're right. Those types of things. Testing is awesome.
It really
Making
may
sure they are
seem
reporting.
benign. Yeah, it may seem benign to that person who's doing it, because you may not ever hear a response. Hopefully you do get a nice little culture to get a response, say, thank you, did a good job here. But it really
Right.
does help. First thing I do in all my support cases that were like talk about phishing emails is like, did you report it? Because there's a lot of information inside of a report that we now can see because you did it. There's nothing inherently that we see until you actually click that button. So I know there's always I was on a service desk for a while. The whole like, did you submit a ticket? I hate to say did you submit a ticket? It's always a great way to start too.
Right. Right. Yeah. Got to keep track of it, right? If
Yeah,
it's not written down, it doesn't exist. So.
for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So other ways, I would say too, just normal. I would say I shouldn't say normal because a lot of people don't do that stuff. It's just basic hygiene, knowing what you have, what assets are there, what services that you, connect to, how do you secure those services, and essentially wrapping that all into like some sort of risk framework is huge. What do we follow? How do we know we're doing what we're supposed to do? That's why those risk frameworks were made. All of them pretty much say the same thing, right? NIST, ISO,
Right.
IAC, all those pretty similar, but
I
also
think that also, yeah, it comes from the top too. So there's only so much us as the employees or the employees can do, but the top has to have the same culture of security. So your C-suite needs to have buy-in from people that say, hey, this is what needs to happen if we want to have a security oriented organization. If the C-suite is saying, hey, I don't want to do MFA, that's a problem to start with. So you really need that top in buy-in. So if there is a problem with, Joe, whoever, in finance, because he wants to use some random tool that has macros enabled in his Excel file,
right, right.
maybe we should find a different way and get someone up top to say, yeah, this is how it's going to be, Joe, and we need to find a better way. So a lot of little things that add up very quickly.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. They do. They do. And if you don't focus, come up with the list, one thing that we do, especially at a lot of different, uh, frameworks, you have to have a risk register essentially. So it's one way to track all this cyber debt within an organization, knowing what the vulnerability scans have done, knowing what the pen tests have done, what risks were identified, how are you remediating those risks over time. That's kind of a big step, man. If you're not doing that, I think you're kind of behind the game. If you don't have MFA on your systems personally, as well as from
Yeah.
a business perspective, you better do that immediately. That's now a have to have now, and even go even further than that. If I'm totally going off track here, but get a FIDO2 key, like a Yubico or something like
Yeah.
that, and figure out what that is and use those, because that's one way to ensure banking, all of those types of things that people can't get into your account. So
Yeah,
okay. I'm
we got
gonna
them
step
hooked
off my
up
soapbox.
all of INKY systems, all of our prod systems are all two-factor authenticated with FIDO keys. So I've
Absolutely.
got one hooked up over
Beautiful.
here. So
Yeah, man. You have to nowadays. It's
yeah,
kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy how things are getting. But yeah, so the difference, let's just talk about this real quick too. The difference between cybersecurity debt and technical debt. Cyber debt is just the accumulation of security risks, like we were talking about in that risk register, vulnerabilities that arise from neglecting, security. And I don't even think it's that. It's security's changing so much, you kind of always have to do this. This kind of has to be a cycle within you, is assessing against what's your cyber debt. How are you going to, what are you doing? How are these implemented? What security practices can we change to fit those needs? We see that a lot. That's cybersecurity debt. Now when we talk technical debt, that's the the cost of the future work that could arise, quickly from the solution, like failing. A bad email comes through, just you guys know what happens there. Somebody clicks on a link, next thing you know, doing scans of machines, making sure they're not affected through EDR, just spawns this whole technical loop that is technical debt, and how much is that future work going to cost us, right? For that. So, you know, what are the key differences, do you think, between, cyber debt and technical debt, other than that, do you think?
No, I think that's a good way to put it. The easiest one I always, again, going back to email, is thinking about people still using, and this may ruffle some feathers, but still using on-premise Exchange or using an old Exchange servers or moving to Exchange Online. So, of course, that's where everything started, Exchange servers. I think that is a technical debt in nature because, Microsoft has built a platform in Exchange Online. It may not be your cup of tea. It may not be your favorite, but it has all the best security that they're investing in. It has all the best organizations, INKY included, that are investing a bunch of technology into. So I think there's some real technical debt from choices that haven't been made or are still to be made in that standpoint. And I think the clearest example of that is, say, like, there are very real reasons not to move to the cloud for some things. I think email in general is not one of them. I think email is far and away a cloud-only service at this point. And there are some things like that. Email is, I think, the best example of it that I can think of. But there are others too that, maybe you don't need a full admin to do that back end work anymore when you can just have Exchange Online or Google Workspace. I always
Right.
prefer Microsoft, but Google
Yeah,
works
I
still.
mean, you have that whole other list of debt, that's there. You have to worry about now uptime and servers, all of that
Yep.
stuff. That's a whole other level.
Operational debt. Yep.
That's it. Right on. Exactly. So yeah, let's talk about this. Now there's a things that delaying, this type of stuff can cause issues to your business growth. We talked about that one. I know that medical firm here in Southwest Florida that lost, their business because of brand reputational damage. Truthfully, they really had no idea what was stolen. They know they were infiltrated. They didn't know what data left, so it's kind of a tricky situation, but you don't have the tools to see it, you're not going to see it, right? So they were in that luck. So there's the brand reputation really killed them, as well as HIPAA fines, that sort of stuff. But you know some other case studies that I'd like to discuss with you. Let's talk about that. Things like Equifax 2017, huge issue because they delayed the patching of vulnerabilities on systems. So this happened because there was a patch to a known vulnerability in their systems, and they delayed that, and an attacker exploited that and steal sensitive customer data too. So
Right.
yeah, crazy. And I think the financial loss to that total was over $700 million, and that was just for the settlement. That didn't
Yeah.
include all that technical debt that happened from the failure in that type of stuff. So
It's where we all of us got that, what, 30 days of free protection, free credit
yeah,
monitoring.
yeah, like that's gonna help,
So
right?
yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know. My data's been stolen so many times now.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter at this point, I guess.
Yeah.
Just lock it
Mine's
up.
long gone. Mine's long gone as well too. So but at the
Yeah.
end of the day, from the fostering the culture of security, in my personal life, I'm pretty locked down everywhere I go. So, like, if you look for me online, you'll probably only find me on LinkedIn, and that's been by design. So LinkedIn's my only sort of public facing persona. And if you're sort of just doing that or controlling your persona a bit, a lot of what you can do in your personal life will help you be less of a target in your professional life too, because your personal life being out there can be used, unfortunately, against you. Um, they can find where you live, all that kind of stuff, and
Yeah. In
I
more
think
ways than one now, right?
and that's sort of just my
Be careful
mindset.
what
It's
you say or
operational
do on
security
the.
and in both personal and professional. Keep it secure in both. Makes you secure all the time, as much as you can be, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
Equifax, horrible thing. We all kind of were
yeah,
were kind of laid to fodder in that one. But
yeah,
I guess a key lesson in that is you got to invest in cybersecurity measures, and if you have them, use them. I'm sure they had a patch management system. They were vulnerability scanning because they have to. They're a regulated organization. They have to be doing these things.
yeah.
They had to have doing for 20 years. So the delay in a patch, that's kind of it's not acceptable now. And that's kind of, AI tools and those sorts of things. And we'll get into that a little bit later. They kind of help with that and meeting those needs, from a patch management perspective. If there's a patch out there and it's got to be there, what's the like how long does it take, to get that from a known vulnerability to where it's weaponized and out there on the internet, right? It's not that long. So,
Yeah,
patching
the
is
vendor
crucial.
side, yeah, for sure. I think the vendor side of the patch management side, it can be tricky if they're not also taking account of their technical debt as they grow too. So there's a whole technical debt from like becoming secure by having more modern systems, but also the products that are being developed need to become more modern over time as well. A lot of development teams, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. And it is a good mindset to keep like that. But say there's some old version of some old package they're using that isn't updated or has only updated to a new version that actually breaks a whole bunch of other things. I'm sure that the reason that they didn't actually do that patch was because it would have broke or had a whole bunch of other work to do before they could actually upgrade. So there is reasons to not do it.
Right.
Obviously, it doesn't make any. It doesn't. It's not the right reasons. But if you're not taking care of, as a vendor, your technical debt over time, maintaining you're making sure that you're up on the latest patches or even the latest packages, you may not be able to patch because it could break some real backend process that you just can't change, and that's where it becomes a real issue. And that's where you have
Didn't
to
tell
get
you
into
worked in a DoD
yeah,
too long.
yeah, right. All of
It's-
all of our SCADA systems and all that kind of fun
right,
stuff.
right, right. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Same thing, right? We see that
right.
constant. Water systems, all that stuff. SCADA is huge. I mean, it's old versions of Windows, operating systems that really don't get patched,
You
huge,
just gotta
big
hope your
issues.
firewall stands up. Yeah,
Right, right. And I
yeah,
hope you're doing a little more than just a firewall.
right.
It's like, right. So let's talk about another one. This one's kind of right up your alley too. So like Change Healthcare, they had that they're part of United Healthcare. They had a credential harvesting of a login, that actually was used through, I think it was like a Citrix remote access, so they stole the credentials, utilized that, but that user didn't have MFA. So completely got lucky, got into the system, complete failure on multiple levels there, So we talk about defense and depth strategies, email protections, MFA would be one of them from access, those types of things. So
Yeah.
huge,
I mean, I think, yeah, of
100
course,
million users.
of course, the first one being that email not being caught initially and the user actually getting to that credential page. So there's a couple of things that could be fixed there, of course, email, of course, being caught. If it was caught, cool, never got to the website. If the person clicks on the link and at link time another scan happens, you could have a second attempt at that fish to be caught again. There's also, and of course, you're in a big enough environment, there could be DNS protections in place. So maybe that website isn't detected by the link protection, but it is on some known DNS black hole or something like that. There's a whole bunch of layers that are all set up to sort of secure your environment that had to have failed to get to even just getting the credentials.
Right.
Once you have the credentials, you think, okay, great. They have the credentials, but they can't get in because I've got all my MFA set up perfectly. Lo and behold, like you say, this one doesn't have the MFA enabled. Of course, there's other ways you can get around that, you know, forcing location for users. Like if they were using location pinning, it could have had a better effect that they're using IP address pinning for the Citrix itself. You can only log into your Citrix device from a specific location. That could have helped. But at the end of the day, there's other ways around that. I could VPN very close to where that person lives or very close to that office. And if they have just, the city as a location, then great, you're in as well. So you have to
Right.
be really mindful of like how you're doing it if you are trying to do that security. And of course, this way, just they didn't have anything past the credential harvest. They were done once that happened, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think a lot of customers too really aren't targeted. They're kind of shotgun method kind of a thing. They're
Hmm.
kind of fodder from a larger based attack. If you're targeted, that's what you're talking about here. Like that's a whole different, issue and problem within an organization. You have people going to be trying to know all of those different things. They're going to figure out what products you use, all of that type of stuff to see how they can defeat you. That's Advanced
And
persistent
that's,
threats, foreign
yeah,
nation states, that's a whole different level. If they're coming after you, you better have all of these ducks in a row and be watching nonstop, for that stuff.
yeah.
So,
And that's where I say like your attack surface is really based around what your appetite for public communication with the world is. So if you have a bunch of Instagrams, Facebooks, TikToks, whatever, and they're all public to the world and everyone can see everything about you, then your attack surface is really open. And that has nothing to do with the work side of the house. Like I said, I keep everything as private as possible to just LinkedIn. So I know if someone does attack me, they're probably coming through my LinkedIn profile. So it's funny, you can see the types of attacks that happen. They'll use the exact like terms that I use on LinkedIn to describe me. So I know it's coming through that, or like the way I write my name is Matt Sywulak versus Matthew Sywulak in
right.
everything I do, but Matthew Sywulak is used in my LinkedIn. So if they use Matthew, I know it's typically coming from that way. There's a whole different ways that like if you keep your surface small, which is of course depends on how you are as a person in the whole internet space itself, it does become easier for you to detect if someone is attacking you. But again, nation states they're different levels. I was on that
Yeah.
side.
And
There's
when
nothing
you and I talk
there's
too,
nothing you can really do. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Right. Right. Yeah, disconnect everything, and that probably won't even
Yeah.
help anymore. Who
As
knows at this point? It's like,
given
but yeah,
enough
most
time
people
and
do take
enough
that
enough money, you can do
laissez-faire.
anything. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say most people do that laissez-faire like thing, like what you're talking about, this hyper focused, how the internet is, those types of things. And most people, laymen from a cyber perspective, don't really know to protect themselves and have their accounts open, don't have MFA on personal accounts, Facebook, social media, Instagram, TikTok, those are all vectors.
Yeah. I mean the AI chat interfaces, if you're paying for one, you'll get access to the deep research side of it. It's like Anthropic has it, ChatGPT has it, I think XAI has it too, where you can do deep research, which will do a long research on the web. So every once in a while, I'll just say, hey, go research me and see what you
Yeah,
can
see where
find.
you're at.
Yeah, and see what is still popping up, what's not popping up. Because at the end of the day, what AI is doing today to make that easier for everyone is I can automate a script that says, here's my 10 targets, do deep research on all of them, scrape every single you can account for already, and get very tailored attacks to each individual person. Where before I could still do some, bulk web scraping and then send out a whole bunch of emails to the same people, but they're not tailored individually to each individual person's personal life now that I can actually research them on the fly without having any sort of, I don't have to do anything. I just have to just wait.
Right. Yeah, yeah, for sure. For sure. So
I
let's move
do,
on a
yeah,
little bit.
for sure.
Let's talk about like the hidden cost of this. What if you don't do cybersecurity debt? Just delay this. How can it affect your business growth? Let's talk about this in a couple different ways. To me, I'll just answer real quick. Financial, operational, reputational. I think that's kind of what we came up with at the beginning of this. Those three areas that could be affected, right?
Yeah, I mean the financial side of the house, of course, is if a full breach happens, like we were talking about the almost $4 million breach average cost these days for the average business. That is far and away the first metric of monetary loss. There's also monetary gains though to be had. So if you do implement debt strategies or technical debt saving strategies, your cyber insurance premiums should start to go down because the people you work with, the insurers you work with, should be providing premium discounts based around the debt you've already figured out. So that if you've implemented processes and technology to say cover email security or to cover MFA to make sure you're checking all these boxes, your premiums should be going down for cyber insurance. And so that is a cost saving measure. It sort of equals out, the money you have to spend to make yourself secure equals out, but now it also allows you to be insured because you still want to be insured and not having the technology and then also not having insurance. So
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the
that's really the
insurance.
financial side. Yeah, the
Yeah, that's
insurance
gotten crazy.
is key. I know operationally, there's a whole bunch of different metrics you can really target, mean time to detection, MTTD, and then mean time to response, so MTTR. So nice little acronyms for everyone. I love acronyms. But any way you can track the mean time to a detection, the mean time to a response, is an operational improvement you can make on a daily basis, maybe not daily, monthly, quarterly, yearly basis, while you're implementing these strategies to reduce technical and technical debt as well as cyber debt. So if you're finding that you are even quicker finding phishing attacks, then great, you're doing better. If you're finding people getting password sprays even faster than before, then great, you're detecting things quicker. So if you weren't detecting things before, maybe you can start and then start chipping away at those averages.
Yeah, absolutely. What is the average dwell time now? It's like 277 days, I believe, before detection.
Yeah. Yeah,
So that's,
unfortunately, it's not good.
yeah, I'm like, that number really hasn't gone down. And I can't remember what it was a few years ago. Russia's elite teams, I think it's like 19 seconds now or something. It went
Yeah,
from minutes to seconds pretty quickly on how fast that they can attack and infiltrate. Like
it's pretty wild. So I mean, that 200 plus time is I think it's mostly because a lot of people just aren't doing much. There are ways you can get that down. Of course, the detections have to be detected. So if there's a good, APT out there, they just won't get detected a lot of times. But even like the script kiddies, if they're not being detected because you just have nothing,
right.
then you're pulling that average way up. Where a lot of you know real good or good companies that actually have something in place can have their detection time down further than that 270 number.
Right.
So I would say that's definitely the average, but that average
You want to
includes
be way
people
lower.
doing nothing. Yeah, people doing nothing, and then people doing everything.
Right. And yeah, for sure. So yeah, sure. Uh, Another thing, higher system downtime, I guess would be another operational metric, right? If you're down, you're out, right? So I mean, this is a side effect of cyber debt and somebody attacking, right? So
Depends the type of
reputational
business.
customer
Yeah,
sides too.
yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit. What are some reputational things that you can think of that would be affected?
At the end of the day, if someone was to get into an environment, depending on which piece they get into, they can ruin your reputation in many different ways. Typically, it is like we were talking about sending outbound phishing emails from you to your customers, because at the end of the day, they'll have your contacts list, the people you communicate with most frequently. Um, Reputational wise, you see someone that is sending you a fish from a vendor, and it's like, well, okay, I'll never work with that vendor again,
Right.
or I'll never work with that person again because they just sent me this fish, and it means a lot of different things that means. It's unfortunate, but it's a hard hole to dig yourself out of if you can when that does happen. Um, and if you're like a tech company, it can get even worse where they have a product that they may be serving from a technology standpoint. If they got into that, that could be even a worse sort of reputational wise. Like it wasn't just say like some back end database that meant nothing. It was actually like the active system that could have modified some product in some way that you didn't know about. So it depends on the organization, but I think the reputation can hit in many different forms. But again, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter if someone finds out that you've been attacked or targeted and breached, and then they find out not through you, through like a breach report, but
Right.
just by themselves. Your reputation starts to tank pretty quickly. If a company is pretty proactive, they find it and then announce it as something that happened and then how they remediated it, then it's a whole different story, I think. Um, so
That does help for sure, especially
yeah,
with, customer brand loyalty,
right,
those types of things.
exactly,
Oh, I can trust them. They're doing what they can
right.
to
Honesty,
fix the
yeah,
solution. Right.
for
It
sure.
is better to come out and be open and honest, man, about
Yeah,
everything. Let's
yeah,
totally truthful on
it
that.
really is. Like you hide anything, someone will find out.
It's gonna happen. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like everything else. It's gonna come
yep,
out, right?
yep.
So we talked about cyber debt, we've talked about technical debt, we've talked about how it affects us, what the causes are. Now let's kind of pivot a little bit. Let's talk about AI. And I know you guys have been pivotal and been using AI and machine learning for years now,
Hmm.
so that's not something new, but a lot of companies already started doing that too. We saw that, what is that, I guess around 2018, 2017
Right.
timeframe, everybody started chasing the machine learning type stuff. So how does AI empower proactive defenses, across our infrastructures?
Yeah, so again, email security related. The core technologies that we build out our product for relate to two different foundational technologies. One being computer vision, and these are both like concepts of AI nowadays. It was called AI back then, but now the AI is now Gen AI. So all these terms sort of meld together now. But computer vision was the first thing we built out back in like 2016. And essentially the thought is if a person can see an email, they can see what it looks like. Great. In our brains, instinctively, we can say this email looks like something. It looks like a brand. It looks like someone I know, because just in my brain, quickly, I can say it looks like Microsoft. That looks like Google. That looks like Hotmail. It looks like whatever you can think of very, very quickly. And that's because we have some great pattern recognition with our eyes and our brain to be able to do that. So the computer vision thought for us was like, how can we make a computer do that same thing? Identify things that are brand indicative or indicative of something. So we're able to develop a system that says for every single email that we process, let's scan it as if a person is looking at it. And that's us, the email security platform, saying, hey, what does this look like? And it could be a well-known brand, but it also could just be brand indicative text. It could be obfuscated characters. So if it looks like it says Microsoft, but the underlying text of the email says Microsoft with a whole bunch of hidden characters between each character, but when it renders, it looks like Microsoft to the person. A person doesn't know there's a whole bunch of hidden characters. The person just sees that it says Microsoft. So it's great because we can see one version, which is what the person sees, and then another version, which is what the computer sees, and with the version that the person will never actually look at. So we can put those two together and say, hey, this looks like Microsoft to the person, but I see a whole bunch of hidden text inside of it. Why is it doing that? And just because it's doing that sort of obfuscation technique, we're probably going to call it out as phishing, but that's just one step. Of course, now we want to make sure that this email saying it's coming from Microsoft is truly being delivered by the source it says it's coming from. And so that's really kind of the key of email in general, is that there's authentication of SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. Those are doing some main core pieces to make email secure, but it doesn't secure the body of the message. The body is what can be changed by anyone. I could add a table inside of it. I could add pictures, GIFs, videos. That can't be secure in the sense of like what it is trying to portray itself as. I can just copy and paste a full standard Microsoft email, and now I look like a Microsoft email, but being sent from some random domain. So those correlations between, hey, this looks like Microsoft, but it's not being sent from Microsoft, we put it together and say, hey, computer vision, this looks like a Microsoft brand impersonation or a brand impersonation for many other brands that we're detecting. That's a core pillar of our techniques to be able to detect against. The second layer of that is putting in some behavioral machine learning, where we start to understand how people communicate back and forth. So if you can think about how you send email on a day-to-day basis, you probably do it the same way without thinking, from the same mobile device, the same laptop, the same desktop, the same general locations. You're not really changing your habits too much because you're just doing work. You're just acting as if you're a normal person. When someone does look different, sending from a new device and some new verbiage or new terminology they use, maybe the sender doesn't say it the same way the original person says, we can see variations and say, this is the patterns that typically look like you when you're normal. And this email comes from someone that looks like you. It's close enough in similarity, but it's just sort of outside the realm of if we think it's you for sure. So we can call that out as what we call potential sender forgery, or just a general impersonation if we're pretty confident. So those two bits of information are the core pillars of INKY that we built with back in 2018. But nowadays, of course, everyone wants to talk about generative AI and how that's really affecting email today. And we have added our own generative AI detection system this past year. It's all homegrown by our own CEO, Dave Baggett. He built it himself. We've taken some off-the-shelf open source models, distilled them, and made them run internal to our infrastructure. So everything is run internal to our environment. We're not sending it out to ChatGPT or Anthropic to do it. And essentially, what we're trying to do is build a new system that can classify mail for its intent. So if the intent of the mail is to say, click this link because I have something for you to do at this link, that's the intent nature of the message. If the intent is saying, please go authenticate at this source, or please reply back to me with some money or something along those lines, there's very many intents of a mail that we're just trying to say, does the message have an intent that could be considered as a part of a phishing totality message? So one of the things I always like to say is there threatening tone inside of it? We use Gen AI to be able to determine that because generative AI is really good at understanding what looks similar to each other. If you just go and like copy and paste a whole bunch of text, like maybe 10 to 14 different things to say ChatGPT, it'll come back and say, hey, this is the outlier in this line of text. It's very good at being able to say these are the commonalities or these aren't the commonalities. So we basically train it against a whole bunch of words, say like unsubscribe now, please unsubscribe. Unsubscribe by clicking the reply button and sending back 6 cat emojis. All those variations of like an unsubscribe, the intent of them are the exact same, getting you to unsubscribe. But the way they say it can't really be tracked in a regex pattern matching system,
Right.
because there's just so many variations. Generative AI is really good at saying, hey, I know intent looks like XYZ. So feed me a message and I'll tell you with a certain percentage if that intent matches or not. So putting that all together is our new generative AI tracking system to say brand impersonation, behavioral detection, and now the intent of the mail, which is run by our Gen AI analysis, puts us together to try to find exactly what's wrong with the message and being able to say if it's phishing or not with some high levels of accuracy. So that's a long-winded way of what we're doing here, but it is really our foundational technology. And again, something I really like to always emphasize is that everything we do is internal to INKY. We're not sending it out to any sort of third-party platforms. All your data stays with us. You got a contract with us. We're not outsourcing it. So
Correct. And you're here, based here in the United States.
Yep, we I think technically Texas is our company headquarters now, but we were founded out of College Park, Maryland. Dave, I think about maybe 50% of the company is College Park, Maryland, but we grew during COVID, so we're hired all over the place. We're all in the U.S. though. We've got Boston, Florida, Texas, California, some Colorado, so all over the place now.
Awesome. No,
Yeah,
it's amazing. We've been a partner with you guys for years, partners with my last company as well. So,
awesome.
continued relationship. We appreciate you guys and what you guys are doing to help us, especially combat, advanced email phishing, business email compromise, all those things that you're talking about. So that's one of those things that it's unnegotiable. You have to have a strategy around email security. When it comes to this, AI is absolutely going to help. It's going to help with threat detection, speed up our response times, spot those new attack patterns, like you were saying, faster, all that type of stuff, to help benefit us, and make us better. So, appreciate your time today. Is there anything that you'd like to add to this?
I'd say we're probably in the future looking at some, of course, always going to be updating our models, making things a lot better, a lot faster. The two foundational things we talked about, or I spoke about, the brand impersonation and the behavioral detection, is a part of our core offering. Generative AI is an upsell, but the core offering does include our best high-level phishing protection. Generative AI is there as a higher level sell. But in the future, we also are looking at different ways to utilize the AI approach. We have some concepts that we call Ask INKY, sort of like an Ask G style approach, but Ask INKY will give you full analysis in human readable format of like what we exactly thought a mail as. So there's always some ambiguity of like what we detected and why we detected something. And AI is pretty much a black box. And so we're doing our best to say like if an admin of INKY wants to know, it's going to start with admins first. It may go to people later or users later. But if an admin wants to know exactly what was detected by the AI, we're cracking open that black box to tell you this bit of text is telling you why this was an intentful nature. This little bit here is why we think this is a business email compromise. This bit here is the Bitcoin part. So we're doing our best in a new release, which we're going to most likely call Ask INKY, as a way for your techs and people that are doing the research into a phishing email to understand it even more so than they already do. We really want to be sort of that person next to your techs to say, instead of just having one tech working on it, you got INKY and that tech together. So we always want to be next to you helping, and we're hoping that that's going to help solve some of those. I'd say, again, AI is always a black box. You don't really know what's coming out of it, what you put into it. We're, again, trying to split that open to give you more and more information. And that's really on the goal roadmap for 2026. So
That's great. That's great to hear.
yeah.
So if you guys out there, anybody needs help or assistance, email phishing, anything within a security control matrix, we supply Inceptus, we're end-to-end cybersecurity. We're a partner of INKY. We use them to, attach to Microsoft 365 and help us secure those environments for our customers. So once again, Matt Sywulak, INKY, pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, John.